You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
The APN is currently looking for network sponsors. Hear your company right here at the beginning of the show and over 60 episodes a month on 18 different shows and reach 70,000 subscribers. Contact the APN via Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. That's Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com to sponsor the only archaeology education and outreach podcast network. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 112 for June 7th, 2017. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about business with CRM Arc podcast host and business owner Sonia Hoopmacher. Should you start your own firm or just subcontract out yourself? What's the difference? All that and more on today's show. So, bust out your tax forms because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today are Bill in Arizona.
Good morning.
And Sonia in Utah.
Hello.
All right. And as we navigate the complexities of time zones in Arizona, Utah, and Nevada and figuring out which ones change and which ones do not.
Yeah, you know what? Hey, we'll just lay this bare. Arizona doesn't change. You guys need to figure out what you're doing. It's always the same time, and it's always Arizona time in Arizona.
Nice. I know half the year you're on my time zone and half the year you're in Sonia's time zone.
No. Half the year you're on Arizona time. The other time, I don't know what you're doing.
It's all about perspective.
Nice. Well, these considerations, time zones and working across time zones are these kind of the things you have to think about as a business owner. And I will say, if you can hear this, I'm going to try to filter some of this out, but I'm going to call it out right now. I'm in a weird room with like a jet engine in the ceiling that is the AC system. So I'm hoping to get that out, but if you can hear that, I apologize. But anyway, we'll try to fix that in post, which means you're hearing the post now. So I'll probably delete all this, or I won't. Who knows? Anyway, what we're going to talk about today is going to be probably part one, although we're not going to call it that, of an ongoing business series that we're not going to do back to back right now, but we are going to have a number of episodes over the next however long it takes talking about business, because that's probably one of the number one questions I get from people who email either the podcast, or I've written some blog posts in the back on the process of starting my business, just like what I was doing with the lessons I was learning. It wasn't really advice. It was just, hey, here's what I did and here's how I screwed up my life. And I get questions on that kind of stuff pretty much consistently. I guess the biggest thing is people, especially shovel bums, whether you're a field tech or crew chief or whatever, if you're traveling around and every time you're out of work and you're looking for more work, the thought crosses your mind. You're like, man, if I just had my own business, I could make more money. I could set my own schedule. I could find my own projects. I could do all my stuff and life would be good. And, wine and roses and all the good things. And everybody has a Tesla in the garage and there's a hot tub full of chocolate. So I don't know where that last one came from, but that's what everybody seems to think. So not that business ownership can't be fulfilling and rewarding. There are good reasons to own a business. There are very fulfilling reasons to own a business, but while this podcast, I want to just say right off the bat that we don't want this to come off as negative. We don't want this to come off as something you shouldn't do. Sonia and I are CRM archaeology firm business owners, and we're not trying to destroy the competition by not letting you be competition in the first place. But what we do want you to know is that there are actual things that you need to consider before you start this. Things that I wish I'd known, quite honestly. I'm not saying I would have done things differently. Like as in not starting my business, because that was something that really was a stepping stone to other things I wanted to do. But there's definitely some considerations that you should be thinking of before you start. So, Sonia, let's get into this.
Okay.
Some of the considerations to starting a business. First, what are the different routes somebody could take if they're constantly just like working for other people, doing things? What are your options if you want to work for yourself? What are a couple of different things that you can do?
If you want to work for yourself, well, you could become an independent contractor, basically an independent archaeologist, which is actually the name of an independent archaeological person here in the Western U.S. for a while. I don't know if he's still around or not, but you can become an independent contractor, which is also known as a 1099. a 1099 independent contractor. And a 1099 person is not an employee. They should never be called an employee or anything like that. The next option is actually start up a business with the intent to start a business, which is kind of like what you and I did, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of go at it with a plan, and you set up the way that you want to run your business and how you want to grow, and then you move on from there. Other than that, you can also just be an employee, and which is not really part of business ownership, although it is part of business ownership as well, especially if you decide to become an employee of your own company. And that's about how to, that's when you're talking about corporations versus independent archaeological contractors. Basically, you can be an employee of your own business. It's just kind of weird in terms of taxes and things like that. So we don't have to go into all that. That's very advanced business stuff. And yeah. I'd rather break you guys all in on the basics rather than jump you in on the more complicated stuff.
Well, I think we'll have episodes on that in the future. Like, okay, so you have decided to start your own business. Now what? What kind of business do you do? But for now, like you said, we'll just keep it to, should you do this, and what are the things you consider, what are the things you need to do to set it up? But I want to bring in Bill and talk to him about what he did, because Bill, you started Succinct Research, which is not a CRM firm, but what made you just to show an alternative? It doesn't need to be necessarily CRM related. If you want to start something else, there's other avenues you can do in archaeology. You can start a podcast network, for example, that makes zero money and costs you all your time. So there's that. But Bill, what was going through your head when you were, working for other people and you just said, I want to start something else, and then how'd that go for you?
Yeah, no, I did want to start my own business because I had been under so many different companies, or with differing levels of managerial skill. So I got fed up, and the idea originally was to go ahead and start Succinct Research as a consulting company like all the others. But at the same time, or very soon after I actually started it and started putting together marketing and all that, I also got accepted to college. So I was thinking, well, you can always just do the business as a kind of a side hustle, and you can just be an independent contractor and do projects while you still finish school. And then I realized that that's not actually, in fact, possible, because school drinks life just like it drinks money. So I focused on finishing school. Now I'm done, and I still have the company open. But also in the process, I realized that it's really difficult to cut in on the actual consulting side, because you have to manage all the labor and do all the other tax stuff, which I'm sure Sonia, who's very savvy and all that, she's going to tell us about that. And also the marketing takes time. And when projects come through, you have to be ready to do them. So while I was doing marketing and getting, leads, and people were asking me if I could do the work, I had tests and, TA stuff that I had to do. And I couldn't just leave and go to Arkansas or leave and go to Tennessee to do a project. So I ended up just recommending other companies, and those projects went to other people. So the marketing was working, but I just couldn't actually do the work because I was stuck in the same location. Mm-hmm. So, one thing, if you are going to start the kind of consulting that Chris and Sonia do, you're going to need to be able to go when the work happens. And it's going to be difficult if you have things like college or another 9-to-5 job that you're working on the side, or if you're going to school. So that's another consideration, managing time. Mm-hmm. But in the process, I realized that producing ebooks and other media and trainings and webinars was really the way to go, because you can create those kind of things and people can purchase them. And once they're built, all you have to do is tend to them. And it's the kind of stuff that you can create yourself and then hire other specialists to make better, while you just get all the proceeds over time. So yeah, I mean, the podcast channel makes nothing. I'd say that Succinct Research's books make, second to nothing. It's definitely not, the multiple thousands to live on, but it's a start though. Mm-hmm. And it's a way to afford other equipment and other things that I need to do the kind of stuff that I do. So I don't regret it at all. I mean, Succinct Research is going, and it'll go as long as I can keep it alive. Mm-hmm. But I have moved away from actual in-person consulting to kind of trying to create the products that help the people who do that.
Yeah. Well, I will make a small plug for the independent person trying to create stuff that's not just for themselves but for the world, like Bill is doing, like his books and what Succinct Research does, because and as the Archaeology Podcast Network, I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but as we move into some paid services that we want to provide, which are really around training and bonus things and stuff like that, but all in the service of outreach and education. So I will say, as shovel bums and as archaeologists in particular, since we really do never have any money, we're very tight with our money, and we're always trying to find the deal. We're always trying to say, how can I get that for free? How can I get that for a reduced price or something like that? What kind of deal can I get on that? And I totally get that. But that being said, if you find something that is a good resource, try to give them the money for it. Bill's books don't cost that much money. My book does cost a little bit of money, but I don't have any control over that, unfortunately. Otherwise, it would have been a $5 book. But if you find those things and they provide value to you, please try to support the people that are doing that so they can continue to put that stuff out, so they can see that's a worthwhile thing. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing about starting a business, it doesn't have to be your 100% 9 to 5 right away. I mean, I started what I was doing when my job was precarious, and then soon I was laid off. So I was glad that I had it because it kept me going. But it takes a long time to build up to the point where you can live off of it, unless you're, already keyed in or, famous or something like that. And you can just start right off the bat. So you mentioned something about the whole being tight with money and always worrying about money, and people pretending like they don't actually make that much when, they make way more than 90% of the people that live in the world. Yeah. You can always start that as your way to get out. And if it doesn't work out, that's cool. It's not even, I think it was less than $200 really to get all the paperwork filed with the state of Arizona and the county and the city that I live in to start a business. And that's like less than the per diem that people get each week for a project. So you could start your own side business and grow it while you're working for someone else. And then hopefully it takes over, unless you've filed signed a non-compete thing. Contract, which I don't know how many field techs would ever do that, but at any rate, it doesn't have to start off being, taking out $100,000 in loans and borrowing against your home and, immediately just starting up. It can be a side hustle.
Yeah, well, and we're going to talk about that, whether or not that's a good thing for you to do or not, depending on where you're at and what you're doing. But let's first talk about motivation and goals. Really, what do you want to get? Why are you starting your own business? What prompted you to even have that thought in your head and then say, okay, if I start my business, I want this. I'll start that, and then we'll go to Sonia. My motivation for starting my own business was not to run a CRM firm, honestly. I'm doing that on a very small scale. I've had some massive projects, but most of the time I've had some really, really, really small projects, like the one I'm going out on next week is in the grand scheme of things, it's like a $13,000 project, which is really kind of nothing when you factor in expenses. I mean, your profit margin on that is nothing to write home about. So my motivation to starting my own business, though, was I was doing some different things. I wanted to explore tablet recording. I wanted to get the podcast network built up, look at a training system, do things like that. And I couldn't really do that while working for somebody else. I couldn't put those things together. At least the companies I had worked for, none of them were really receptive to developing something like that. So I said, okay, the only way I'm going to get this done is one of two ways. Either I find a company that is willing to give me the freedom to put this together, but none did, or I start my own company and I'm doing CRM kind of, I almost want to say on the side, just because it's kind of, when you do find projects, it is a way to keep the lights on and not really work all year round if you keep it small, for me anyway. I don't have employees consistently. I have them when I need them, things like that. So it's a way for me to keep the lights on and work and do other things. So that's why I started mine. I wanted the ability and I guess the freedom to try to do other things that still are business related, but that were outside the conventional ideas of what business really means. So Sonia, what do you have to say about goals and what was your motivation to starting your own business?
Well, when I first went into CRM, my intent was never actually to start my own business. And so when asked, what did you want when you started your own business? It wasn't necessarily about what I wanted. The reason I started my own business was more based on what I was hearing from my clients and what they needed. So I've worked for medium and large size companies. I've actually worked for small companies as well, earlier in my career. And one of the complaints that I was hearing when I was working for medium and large size businesses was that why is archaeology so costly? And why is there so much bureaucracy in your business?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they telling you to do all these things that we don't need you to do? And so I'm listening to all of these complaints and concerns from my clients because business started making things too complicated. And big business, I should be a little bit more clear. Big business started making things too complicated. And many of you listeners may know and understand that. Why does the business make things really complicated for you and for your clients? So I suppose when asked what was my goal was to meet the needs of my clients and to try and reduce some costs for them, and to make a lot less bureaucratic BS.
Yeah,
that was going on in the larger businesses. Another complaint that I'd received was that as businesses start to grow, as archaeology, like CRM firms start to grow, they start to think that they know more about what their clients need than what their clients do. And that's not the case. You may understand the process a little bit better than your client, but your client's always going to know, or not always, that's a bad word to use. Many times, if you're working for mining companies or transportation or the forest or the BLM or whomever, they're actually going to know what they need to have done.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need you to step in, you as the CRM firm, to step in and tell them how to do their jobs. It's kind of condescending.
Mm-hmm.
And I started getting a lot of concerns expressed to me based on other project managers that I was working with. Just too much bureaucratic BS, too much cost, too much overhead, and hopefully you guys will be able to talk to you guys about what overhead is. And when I say you guys, I mean listeners.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be able to talk to you and educate you about what overhead is a little bit later on in the show. But it was important to me to fulfill the needs of my clients, to assist them in educating them if they did need it, and fulfilling their needs if they already knew what they needed to have.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about money for me. I always knew that archaeology wasn't about money. It was about doing what I love to do and what I'm good at doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So honestly, if you think you're going to go out and start your own business to make millions of dollars, that's not going to happen. Or maybe I should rephrase. It could happen as long as you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you've got a good education and a lot of experience. If you decide after a year of field teching that you feel like you could do it better, you better make sure you know some very, very detailed answers
Mm-hmm.
to some challenges that you're going to face as a business owner.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, we're going to explore this a little more and talk about more motivations and then some questions you should ask yourself before starting a business in about 30 seconds when we get back from the break. This episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast is made possible by Codify Incorporated. Codify is a California benefit corporation that can help you with your digital archaeological needs. Visit codify.com today to find out how Codify can help you go paperless in 2017. That's www.codify.com. Now back to the show. Okay, welcome back. And before we had the break, Sonia was talking about, and I mentioned before that, you know, some motivation and goals before starting your own business. And like Sonia mentioned, and I didn't mention but should have, money should not be your first consideration. You really need to be somebody who's, I think, concerned about not only first and foremost really archaeology and doing an ethical and responsible job to the resource that you're recording and that you're beholden to, and not only the resource but the stakeholders and, you know, all those people. So you know, it's not just about you. It's a really bigger thing than that. And you have to be like uber conscious of that fact. And then once you get to the point where you have employees, if you're not constantly thinking about your employees, then you're probably being a shitty employer. And we've all worked for those people who really just, they're staying up late at night working on reports and they're doing those things, but they're not considering their employees. They're not considering what their employees are going to do, and the fact that they hold their employees' lives in their hands because they write the paychecks and they say, "What are you doing next week?" All those things, and that's a really, really massive responsibility. So it's something you have to think about. But if you're saying, "Well, I'm not going to have employees, I'm just going to do this on my own," there's still a lot of things that you have to consider before going into this. So Sonia, what are some of the questions that somebody should ask themselves? And maybe we'll try to answer some of these with our own answers
Okay.
before they decide to do business ownership, regardless of what that looks like, whether you got a loan from grandma and you started your own, 1,000-person employee environmental firm, or you're a subcontractor and a lone wolf and out doing things. Either way, what are some questions you should ask yourself before you decide to make that leap?
Okay. So these are just a few questions that I have off the top of my head. There's a whole bunch more questions that you could ask yourself and that you should ask yourself before you start a business. The first one, and these are in no particular order, do you really understand what you're getting yourself into? Do you really understand what you're getting yourself into?
I still don't.
When you decide to start a business. Do you know how scary it is to start a business and to be responsible for bringing in all your own work? It sounds easy theoretically, but I mean, do you understand what your liability is if somebody gets injured on your job, or if you get injured on your own project under your own contract? Like, if you were to get injured on your contract and you're the only person working for you, who's going to fulfill your legal responsibilities to your client?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, do you truly understand what you're getting yourself into? Is the first question. My second one is, how much experience do you have? Do you have sufficient experience to understand the Section 106 process? Do you understand what an EPA is versus what an HPA is? What the difference between the Antiquities Act and the Archaeological Resources Protection Act? Do you know all the differences?
Mm-hmm.
And do you know what the process is for a project, a standard project, like from beginning to end?
And on the experience question, I mean, do you have the necessary experience to officially, and whether they have permitting process or not, but actually work for some of the agencies that you might want to work for? They have experience requirements in certain areas. Do you have the ability to actually get the permits? Because if you don't, you're going to have to hire or partner with somebody that does.
Yeah, and you're going to have to provide your clients with professional recommendations. They're going to ask you what you recommend to doing in certain situations. Do you have the skill and the experience to make those recommendations? And are you confident that the recommendations that you are giving your clients are legal?
Yeah.
Or ethical, responsible, are going to resolve their problem? Do you have that type of experience? Something I already mentioned, like, have you ever written a technical and cost proposal? And if so, have you written cost proposals for private contractors, like primes, like prime contractors? Do you even know what a prime contractor is versus what an agency is? Have you ever worked and prepared technical and cost proposals for the forest versus the BLM? Do you know how to put together overhead rates, billing rates, profit margins, G&E costs? Do you know what all of those things mean? If you don't, you may not be ready yet. Another question, do you have investment money? Earlier, Bill was talking about how much it actually costs to start a business, only a couple $100s in some cases, but it takes money to make money. So for example, when I left the company that I worked for previously to me starting my own business, I had to make sure that I was leaving with a clear, clean conscience, that I was not stealing any of their contracts, and that none of my clients knew that I was leaving until well after the fact. because I did not want there to be any ethical issues between me leaving my prior job and me starting my new business. Did my company like that? No, they didn't. But we dealt with it, and fortunately I didn't get sued or anything. But those are always risks, especially if you have non-compete or non-disclosure agreements in place. So those are things to take into consideration. You need to also have the money available to you. It takes money to make money. So you can take out a loan from grandma if you want to, or your parents if you want to. But to go along with what I was saying, since I didn't tell my clients, I had a plan in place, but I also had a financial buffer in place, something that I could live on for a period of time while I was establishing clients and putting out technical proposals. So I think when I started my business, I started with $40K in the bank. I wish I'd had about 50.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of money to save up. And that was also over a winter with work picking up in the spring, but work picking up in the spring kind of coincides with tax season.
Yeah.
So when you invest all this money, you're still responsible for paying taxes at the end of the year.
Right.
So keep all of these things. I mean, that's complicated. So make sure you get yourself an accountant and a legal advisor in place. I don't know if you did that, Chris.
I had an accountant in place. In fact, I still do. Obviously, I've changed a few times because you have to find an accountant that's the right fit for what you want to do, and that understands what you do. And then for legal help, I don't have somebody who's like on retainer, but I do have a couple different people I talk to on a fairly regular basis just to bounce questions off of that I happen to know that kind of work in this space a little bit. So, but you're right, and these are some of the hidden costs, because you say, oh, just get an accountant, but that accountant is not free. and that,
and neither is your legal advisor.
Neither is your legal advisor.
They're going to be the ones that start helping you prepare your contracts, your personal contracts, like through your company.
Yeah.
You're also going to consult them anytime one of your clients gives you one of their contracts, which leads me into my next question. Do you understand the difference between indemnity and liability? Do you know what indemnifying your client means versus them indemnifying you if something happens? What are you liable for if you breach contract or if your client breaches contract?
Right.
Do you know what mutual indemnity is? If you don't know the answers to these questions, find out, because this is all part of business and it's complicated, and it's not something that archaeologists were trained for. If in terms of conflict, like we were just talking about the indemnity and liability if something were to happen, do you like working with people? I mean, archaeologists tend to be a little introverted. And if you really don't like people, even though you can get along with people, you're going to work with people, and they're not always going to be happy-go-lucky and want to go out and have a beer with you.
Right.
How do you resolve conflict? Like right now, think about it. How do you personally resolve conflict when you have an issue? Do you go out and start, slamming them to all your friends? Are you going to do the same thing to a client who you feel has transgressed? If your client says, no, I expect that deliverable on Friday, and you're like, well, I can get it to you on Monday. And if they say no, what are you going to do about that? How much time do you have on your hands? That's another good question. If you feel like your days are already full, I can pretty much tell you you're going to end up working at least twice as much. You might get 4 to 5 hours of sleep at night sometimes, depending on how busy you are, assuming you're busy. Another good question is, how do you handle your personal finances? If you can't handle your own personal finances, your professional and business finances are going to be a mess.
Yeah.
So something to consider there. Do you know how to invest? I said earlier, it takes money to make money. You need to be able to invest in your business. Basically, that means is you may have equity in your business. That's like tax-free money that you can pull out as what's called a member draw, meaning you own the business, you have this money invested, it's already been taxed, it can't be taxed again, but are you going to throw that money back into your business so that it continues to build? or are you going to pull it out and go buy yourself your awesome car?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Do you have a family? Because archaeology is not a regular job. It's contract based. If you have a family, does your spouse or your partner have a job? Are they going to be supporting you during times when you're not working? Are you going to be able to plan for those situations? Is your partner going to be accepting of the fact that you're working 18 hours a day for 6 weeks? Are they going to be cool with that?
And I'll just interject real quick. That's not unique to archaeology. That's unique to business ownership. It doesn't matter what kind of business you start. If you want it to be successful, if you want it to thrive and improve and do whatever you're going to do with it, it's going to be just you in the beginning. And it might be you and maybe a partner or a couple partners, but you few people, if not just one person, are going to have to do all the work. And early on, until you have the ability to hire people and start selling off some of those tasks that you're doing, then it's all you. And so that's just business ownership. It's not just archaeology.
Exactly. I mean, here's another great question. Do you have a business plan?
Mm-hmm.
Like, have you ever sat in on, if you're working for a company on a regular basis, have you ever sat in on one of their planning meetings? It usually involves the project managers, and sometimes they'll involve field directors and things like that if they're trying to mentor them to get them to move up. If you've sat in on one of their business planning meetings, you may know and understand what the business plan is and how that plan changes over time. And additionally, along the lines of a business plan is, do you have an exit strategy? Mm-hmm. If something happens, or if your business is going great and you decide to retire, what's going to happen to your business? Are you just going to close the doors, slam them closed, lay everybody off, and take your money and run? Or are you going to sell your business? Or are you going to sell it to your employees? It's called an exit strategy. You kind of want to know how your business is going to be run. That's the business plan. And then the exit strategy along with it. And this is especially important if you plan to take out loans. Maybe they're federal, like small business loans. Sometimes your grandparents are smart enough to go, show me your business plan, buddy. I want to make sure that you know what you're doing. Other times they'll be like, here, sweetie, here's 10 grand. You never know.
Right.
But there's also something called a waterfall business model. Archaeology is traditionally considered part of a waterfall business model. You start one place, you have to do one thing to get to the next step, you have to do one thing to get to the next step. So you start with your technical and cost proposals. You submit that to your client for their review. It's kind of an if-then. If they accept your proposal, then we move on to contracting. If you can accept their terms and conditions, then you move on to project initiation. Once project is initiated, you start with your literature search. Then from the literature search, you go into your survey. And your survey may have certain steps. Or if you're doing data recovery, you may have other steps in there, like preparing a plan. Do you understand the waterfall business model? Do you understand all the steps that it's going to take in order to fulfill that contract? Mm-hmm. So it's a type of business model. And it just takes understanding what the process is. And if you have sufficient experience with a company and you've been doing project management and you know how to read a contract and you've gone to contract training and you know how to build a budget, you may be ready.
Yeah, you might be.
You might be. If you're just out of college with your bachelor's degree, it depends on how much experience that you have before you got your bachelor's degree. You know what I mean? There's plenty of people out there who've got 20, 30 years of experience doing something else and then decide to start a business in archaeology, and maybe their business prior to that was, I don't know, carpet cleaning or something like that. Who knows?
Right. Well, so knowing all that in the last 2.5 minutes of this segment, Sonia, why the hell did you start your own business with all of these questions and all of these things and all of this stress and all these late nights and all these things? Why'd you do it? Is it still the reasons why you started your business? Are those still valid, or have they changed? Have they modified? Or are you still operating on the basic principles that you started your business with?
I am still operating on the basic principles that I've started with. And I felt like I was ready. That doesn't mean that I knew everything. And that doesn't mean that I didn't learn new things. Before we started the podcast, Chris, you and I were talking about workers' compensation, and each state has its own requirements. And so you start freaking out about different things. But I still learned things. But I had gone through a lot of training. I had intentionally stayed with big businesses and moderate-sized businesses so that I could learn how to manage projects. And now that I have started my own business, I still go into it asking myself, what is it that my clients need? And how can I best provide that to them? Whether I have to sometimes be harsh with them and no, that's absolutely unacceptable, or absolutely, this is fantastic. Let's move forward. This is my recommendation on how to make this easy.
Yeah.
I still move forward with what is it that my clients need, not necessarily want, but what do they need?
Yeah.
And how can we fulfill their legal obligations? And I was ready to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm good at it. And I love archaeology. I love geomorphology. I am very good at those things. But what I'm also very good at is finding out what people need and fulfilling their needs.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we're gonna talk about, I think, a couple alternatives too. To if you can't answer all these questions, but you still have the same basic goals and motivation, but you don't have the desire to really go through all the stuff it takes to do these things, and we'll go over some alternatives. And Bill does have opinions on this, I assure you, but he's getting his tires done right now, so he might be back for the third segment. I gotta respect him for coming into the podcast on his cell phone when he's out running errands. That's admirable, but we're dealing with that. We're not shutting him out, just so you know. So, all right, back for the final segment in just a minute. The Archaeotech Podcast, hosted by Chris Webby Webster and Chris Boone Sims, is a show dedicated to the technology of the modern archaeologist. On the Archaeotech Podcast, we interview people using interesting tech, and we dig into the issues, advantages, and try to uncover the disadvantages of the digital age and going paperless. We all know there is no paper in the future, or should we say, paper has no future. Check out the show at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. Let's get back to the show. All right, we're back for our final segment, and let's start wrapping this up. So I want to say, first off, because business ownership might not be the answer, especially, Sonia had this great list of questions, and if any of those terrify you, they all terrify me. If they don't, then, you probably already own several businesses and you're successful at it. So if that's the case, feel free. But if you look at your goals, back to the beginning of the discussion, if you look at your goals and your motivation, and let's say your goal is to have a little more flexibility with what you want to do. Maybe your goal is to do more research. Maybe your goal is to do a particular phase of project management or something like that you're really interested in. Maybe you really love writing reports. Maybe you really love just doing field work. Well, sometimes the answer to being able to do those things, and also you love to be able to pay your bills and you love job security and things like that. Sometimes the answer to that is to just work for a really big company. And I hate to say that, but these really big companies, they have a little bit more flexibility than, say, a bunch of the smaller companies. The big companies, like a small company, you're going to be really beholden to how much work they can bring in. And that's usually on the shoulders of one person, like Sonia or like myself. It's on our shoulders to bring in work and to support the other people working for our company. With a larger company, they might have other offices. They might have, 10, 15, 20 PIs, principal investigators that are, or actually business developers. And, that's a whole separate category of employment at some of these larger companies. And the business developer might not even be an archaeologist. In fact, at these larger companies, it probably isn't. And it's somebody who just goes out there, looks for contracts for the departments and brings them in. Another advantage to working for a large company is the archaeology division can probably operate at a loss, and probably does, just because that's how things work. But since you're part of a small, tiny pie that is a $1 billion project, they don't care. It's just something they want to offer as a service to their clients, and it gets done. why I'm saying that and why this could actually be good for you if this is what your goal is to do certain phases of work. There's 20 other people that work in your department, and you can say, okay, I want to be the expert in this, and this is what I want to do. You might be able to do that. Of course, you're going to be working for somebody else, and if they want you to do something else, well, then you're going to have to do that if you want to keep your job. But at these large companies, I mean, the PIs at these things easily make, 70,000 plus a year and upwards of $100,000 and more. So if your goal is to pay your bills, work sensible hours, and do these things, then you might just consider that. Now, if you don't have the education and experience, you're probably going to have to get that or wait until you have that and go that route. So I'm interested in what Bill had to say. He didn't hear the last part of our conversation, but he is back. So Bill, what are your thoughts on possible alternatives to owning your own company or something else?
I did hear what you guys were saying. I just couldn't respond.
Oh, good. Nice.
No, it was great. I love that stuff. That's why, Sonia, you're definitely an asset to the whole podcast because of your experience and everything that you do. I mean, not only are you good at the business end, you're also good at telling other people about it in a way that, is open and encouraging that actually helps others. So all that stuff you said was excellent.
Thanks.
Going back to, well, you're doing great. The thing about working for a bigger company, Chris, you're exactly right. One of the things that helped me out a lot was being a historical archaeologist that knew enough about buildings to fill out a building inventory form in the American West. So back east, there's a lot of historical archaeologists. There's a lot of people who do, I wouldn't say architectural history, but know enough about historical architecture to write up a form for, a shed or a house or something like that. But in the West, everybody wants to do prehistoric. So here in Arizona, it's, Hohokam is life. And if you don't like it, then you're not going to survive in Arizona. However, no one really thinks that those 1940s trash dumps or 1919 irrigation canal systems or these old ranch, barbed wire fence lines, they don't think any of that stuff's important or interesting. I take that back. Not that they don't think it's important, they just don't think it's very interesting compared to Hohokam. Mm-hmm. So in the West, not only here in Arizona, but Seattle and elsewhere, I've been able to really get hired and, be the historical archaeologist on projects that weren't even, I wasn't even actually doing the field work. They just needed someone who could look at the photos or look at the maps or write the history section. And, that was my niche. And it served me really well in the West. And I did work for a couple of larger companies, one of them, pretty big that had multiple offices all over the West. And, I was able to find work and get employed on a lot of different projects where if I had just had a standard prehistory background or if I didn't know historical artifacts, I probably wasn't going to, I probably would be either laid off or on limited duty doing something else. But I was able to keep myself employed because I really cared about historical archaeology. So going back to the original question, if you care about GIS or, you just want to have the specialty and you don't necessarily want to do every single thing and you're not interested in hustling up the contracts all the time, just being really good at one or two specialties and working at a larger company, that really, you can have a fruitful career doing that in some cases.
Yeah, based on, what Bill's just said, diversification is critical to business, especially as a business owner. If you only know how to do archaeology in the West and you don't have any other skill set, you're going to have a hard time being a business owner. So make sure you diversify your skill set before you jump into the business ownership pool.
And not only that, but if you are lone wolfing it out there and you're just doing maybe small projects, little things, you have to know how to do all the things unless you have the money to hire somebody, even as a subcontractor, which we didn't really get into, but has its own headaches. If you like let's for example, if you're going to do this out here in Nevada and you get a small project out wherever and oh shit, there's a structure on your project. Well, the law now, not law, but regulation now from the state and from the Bureau of Land Management is that you have to have a qualified architectural historian write a separate report for that structure. They have to come out, see the structure, write a report on it, and that's separate from the report that you now that's an added expense too that you have. If you didn't do your if it didn't show up in your research, your preliminary research, that you might possibly find something for that, and you don't have a contingency for that with your client, then that's a possibility. And it's a pretty distinct possibility out here in Nevada. I mean, we have a lot of really open land, but there's mines all over the place. And if there happens to be a structure left, even if it's a small structure, if it's a standing structure, now this doesn't mean like head frames and things like that, which you also have to know. But if it's a building of some sort associated with whatever, ranching, mining, who knows, then that's a separate added expense. And if you don't know that, or if you do know that, but you're not an architectural historian, you can't write that report. You just simply can't. So it's a problem. And you have to know how to do everything. If you're, like Bill said, like, let's say you're Bill White and you're a fantastic historic archaeologist. And I'm not saying Bill doesn't, but let's say you don't know anything about prehistorics. Well, if you're lone wolfing it out on a project and you find a whole bunch of prehistoric stuff, now it's your job to analyze all that. It's your job to write that up. I mean, right, Bill? You have to know pretty much everything about the archaeology if you're going to do it by yourself.
Yeah, I love historical archaeology, and I'm interested in pretty much every single period of history. But that doesn't mean that I don't care about prehistoric, and that doesn't mean that I haven't had to learn about it like crash course.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that's awesome about working at a larger company is sometimes you have someone there that wrote like the PhD on this coastal California tribe, and you can call that person in the company and say, hey, we're doing a project. It's close to where you have experience. What should I read in the next 48 hours to make me be aware or able to identify this stuff, since I live in Nevada or somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's that kind of in-house expertise is directly available to you. You will have to know a whole bunch of stuff about everything. So don't think that just because you know historics, you're not going to have to know about Paiute projectile point types or Paiute land subsistence systems in the way that they lived on the land, because
Mm-hmm.
The way that a rancher or miner is using the land is way different than especially Great Basin tribes, because they're definitely doing whole different strategies and a different concept behind it. So being open, and just like Sonia said, being willing to diversify yourself. There's been so many times when I've been out there and we walk across glass and all kinds of stuff, and then I say, hey, stop. That thing looks like it's about 100 years old, and everybody's eyes roll because it's 100 degrees out, and they're just like, oh, another bottle pile or another can dump. Oh man. Well, what they're forgetting about is the fact that we're paid to record sites, and sites are defined by the state or the federal agency or whoever you're working for, right? So sometimes I'm rolling my eyes when we have 25 hohocom sherds and 16 flakes, and we have to record that as a site, right? But they're also rolling their eyes when it comes to 55 bottle fragments and some tin cans and a ceramic plate, because they don't necessarily want to record it. Well, it's not whether you really want to, it's opening your mind and being willing to understand the fact that according to the law and according to the industry that we're in, that is an archaeological site, and we need to record it and look at it and make sure that the state knows that resource exists.
That's right. You are the person on that, and you know everything. I mean, I think that's what that amounts to.
Yeah, well, or that you don't ever have, what's the saying? I can't even remember it, but you don't have to be the smartest person. You just have to be in the same room with all the smart people.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to know all that stuff, but you have to know that you take a GPS point in a whole bunch of photos on your phone, and when you get within reception, you start sending that to the office and the personal emails of that historic archaeologist or of that person who specializes in that tribe, so that you can get their input like tonight while you're at the hotel to know what the depth or how important this thing is and to answer questions. So just blowing it off like, oh God, that's another can dump. Oh, great, and then just taking 5 photos and filling out the form or filling out the tablet without actually thinking about it or having someone on the team who knows anything about it. I mean, that's how bad archaeology is done.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, if you're at a bigger company, a lot of times you have a straight up private cell phone line to a specialist that knows about that stuff, or someone who's done 75 historic mines in Nevada that can tell you all about the stuff just based on some cell phone photos.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a lone wolf and you go it yourself, You might not know those people. They might not be willing to talk to you. You might end up, not doing the right thing because you just don't know.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to get into the, sort of the types of businesses just in the last, really brush into that here in a second. But one of those things to consider if you are out there by yourself and you don't actually know everything, which is everyone, then, or you're not experienced enough to have a heavy enough knowledge in a lot of subjects that you can handle most of that on yourself. If you started your own business because you burned a lot of bridges and you can't get any work or nobody will hire you or something like that, that's going to be real tough for you when you do have to answer those questions. You're not going to have somebody on speed dial that you can call and say, hey, what is this? What's going on here? Because they will talk to you because you burned all your bridges. So keep that in mind. Just starting a business just because you pissed everybody off is not necessarily a recipe for success. So moving on from there, Sonia, in the last 4 or 5 minutes of this podcast, what are some of the, let's say you've answered all these questions, you still decide, I want to start a business, let's go this route. What are some types of businesses that you can start? What are some basic business models without really diving into it? We'll probably have a whole podcast on this later on, but without really diving into it, what are some basic things to look at?
Okay, so in general, let's just talk in general and not specifics here.
Mm-hmm.
There's like sole proprietorships, and then there's corporations. There's types of corporations, okay? So sole proprietorships, a lot of independent archaeologists will decide that they want to start their own business that's just them. And you want to be a sole proprietor, and that's perfectly fine. I've known plenty of sole proprietors who decide they want to do that. Just be aware that there are risks involved with that. As a sole proprietor, you are personally liable for everything, for all debts, for all breaches of contract. That means that you get sued personally, and that if you lose, the people who sued you can come after you and your personal assets if there is an issue. Also, with that, you have to worry about self-employment taxes. So as a sole proprietor, we frequently call this a 1099. So an IRS 1099 independent contractor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You're responsible for maintaining all of your own insurance. You are subject to all the contract flow down provisions that are in your client's contract. So that means you are responsible for your auto insurance, your corporate commercial insurance, health insurance, what else? Your professional errors and omissions. Just as a heads up, that's about $5,000 to $10,000 depending on where you live and work.
Yeah.
Okay, a year. That's a year. So keep all that in mind when you're talking about sole proprietorships as an archaeological business. The next thing is corporation. The most common corporation that archaeological companies will start is called an LLC. An LLC is not federally recognized by the IRS. It is considered a corporation. That's why I said sole proprietorships and corporations. There are different types of LLCs. That's a state designation. Under the IRS, there's a C Corp and an S Corp. Limited liabilities companies. So remember when I said you are personally liable as a sole proprietor for everything? A limited liability company actually protects your personal assets, meaning your investments, your personal property, your home, your car, all that stuff, from getting taken away if you breach contract or if something falls through or there's an issue. You take out a loan, that sort of thing. So it protects you personally. So you can start an S corporation, which is what I have, which means I operate as a corporation. I am actually an employee of my own business, even though I am the owner of it. I'm also an employee of it. So I pay myself a paycheck every 2 weeks. Usually I pay myself after all my other crew get paid. We haven't had any issues with that, so I get paid every 2 weeks. C corporations are more like incorporate, like companies that have Inc. after them. So they're just taxed differently by the feds. Okay, so those are the basic types of businesses. I like to say there's 3 basics: your sole proprietorships, your LLC, and your Incs., your incorporated businesses.
Mm-hmm.
But that's mixing state designations with federal IRS tax designations. In terms of profit, sole proprietors get to take all the profit. It's your money. You're paying taxes on it. You're paying your self-employment taxes, all of that stuff. LLCs, the profit can go back into the business, or it can go to you. Depends on how you want to build your business. With corporations, like incorporated businesses, it goes back into the business. And then owners can take certain percentages, and there's a little more complicated, but it's not difficult. It's just more paperwork. So those are the basic types of businesses. There are also things called partnerships. So that's when more than two people or two or more people come together to start a business. That's not a sole proprietorship necessarily, although you can have a husband and wife proprietorship, but it becomes a partnership. And then you can have LLCs that are partnerships. You can have corporations that become types of partners. They report to a board of directors, that sort of thing. And then you also have these subclassifications. You can have veteran-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, woman-owned businesses, LGBT-owned businesses. They're considered more minorities or, and I hate to put it this way because it sounds really political, special interest groups. Groups that have been classified by the federal government as disadvantaged. So veterans are one, women are another, minorities. And just as a heads up, women are not considered minorities. Minorities, meaning Hispanic American, Asian American, Native American, LGBT groups. Those are all classifications of businesses that you can use to assist you to get small business contracts. There are a lot of different types of contracting mechanisms for small, minority, or disadvantaged businesses. Disadvantaged business enterprises are another classification of businesses. So you take I am registered as a woman-owned business because I am a woman. I am registered as a disadvantaged business enterprise, not only because I'm a woman, but also because I make less than a certain amount of money. Once my business starts making more than $15 million a year, which, by the way, we're not even close to that. I'm sorry, Bill. African Americans as well. I forgot.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's the reason why that thing was invented.
Yes.
I'm just joking. I'm joking.
I apologize. I'm winging it here.
That's all right.
Sometimes
So
I need an auxiliary brain.
Nice.
You're all right.
I'm not reading from a script, everyone, just for the record. Anyway, there, like I said, there are different types of contracts available for disadvantaged businesses. And I've gotten my share of crap from some friends of mine who feel like that's unfair. That because I'm a woman, that I should be given a leg up on things. And I got to be honest with you guys, I have never, not once, in my 5 years of owning a business as of June, by the way, nice. I have never won a contract because I was a woman. I have always won contracts because I was competitively priced and qualified to do the work that I do. And that's what you need to focus on, not because you're disadvantaged business, not because you're a minority business, but you are qualified to do the work. And Bill's right. Racism and sexism is unfair. And there are a lot of people in our community who feel like that shouldn't matter. Because what is the phrase? If you work hard, you can get anything you want. Well, that's not always true. That's not always true. I work my butt off, but do I do as well as some of my gentlemen friends who are business owners? Not necessarily. There are times when I feel like I have to take my one of my employees with me in order to add to my credibility, because I'm a woman and he's a man.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. And Bill, perhaps you can speak to this more than I can. I'm not African American, or I only have one Tesla too. No, I don't.
I have no Tesla. That's why there's those set asides. I don't even have a Tesla yet.
Bill,
no, I mean, I'm
Can you
sure
talk about that a little bit? You've probably seen more than I have. I've seen the sexism part, but not the racism.
Well, in archaeology, it's now normal to have women, so sexism is a normal thing. But racism, in a lot of ways, as far as actual overt discrimination based on race, is, I think, maybe a little bit more rare because there's not so many minorities. The racism that you end up facing is really kind of ignorance, like people who have never been around Native Americans or African Americans and just actually have never been set in their place. They just don't know, right? Actual strategic discrimination against people based on race is not really necessarily a thing, I think, in CRM, because there's not really any minorities anyway. So it's women that they're always complaining about them not being able to do the same level of work, or not being up to the task, versus minorities, because there just simply isn't minorities to discriminate against. But hopefully I'll help change that.
I think, we're going to wrap it up for this episode, but I want to go back one thing to Sonia was saying about the veteran, minority, and women-owned businesses. Keep in mind, and I've had to tell people this before too, if you do have partners in your business, you start this with somebody else. If you're going to try to claim veteran or disabled veteran, that's also a category, a little bit higher category, minority or women-owned business, the person or persons that are claiming that status need to have a majority ownership in the company. So if there's two of you and one of you is a veteran, or one of you is a woman, or one of you is a minority, you need to have 51% ownership in that company, and the other person has to have 49%. I mean, it could be 50.1% if you really want to get crazy down to it, but it has to be majority ownership. If there's three of you and the other two are not veterans, let's say, for example, then the veteran needs to have, I guess, what would that be, 34% ownership, and the other two need to have equal, or however you split that up. There needs to be a majority ownership by the person claiming that status. So, yes, I think maybe I was wrong on my percentages. Sonia.
Okay, so another thing, a lot of people have tried to pass one by the feds on this minority-owned business, woman-owned business, or veteran-owned business thing. For example, I have heard of companies saying, you know what, instead of the predominant, the person in the company is actually, and I apologize if this sounds sexist, is the man. He has the master's degree in archaeology. He's running the business. But because he's a partnership, or he says that his wife, who is not an archaeologist and doesn't have any experience in business, is the business owner. And what the federal government has done to remedy this situation, I mean, she has no part in the company other than that she is a kind of a front woman.
Yeah.
And what the feds have done to remedy this situation is to say, no, she needs to not only have 51% in the business, but she has to be an active participant in the business, which means she needs to participate. She needs to be the front person and with the skills available. So you can't just call yourself a woman-owned business if you give your wife 51%. She has to do 51% of the work in the business. Right. And when I say the work, I'm not talking about field crew and that sort of thing. I'm talking about leadership, management, proposals, marketing, everything. You can't just put 51% in your wife's name and have her taking care of the kids while you're out running the business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the feds have tried to address this.
Yeah. And that's a fantastic point. Obviously, when I started my business, my wife was an archaeologist before that. And that was a brief conversation that we had. Hey, should we bring you in on this and make you the owner so we can get that? Because, we're only human. We, of course, had that thought. And I had some good advice that said, listen, unless she's actually going to do exactly what Sonia just said, which is run the business, then don't do it. It's not worth it. So...
you mean make it legit? I mean, be honest. If you are trying to start your own business in order to provide a better service to your clients, be honest, for crying out loud. Don't try to pull the wool over the Fed's eyes, because you're going to get yourself audited. And let me tell you, you don't have the money for that.
Plus, I told my wife if I was going to make her the owner, I literally was going to do nothing and she's going to do all the work. She didn't like that either. So, all right. Well, we've gone a little long on this episode, but I think it's good. And it shows that we have a lot to talk about. So I will just let you guys in on something that we're talking about now that we haven't put together yet, but we will be doing it over the summer. As we roll out kind of a membership system for some premium type things that we want to do. Nothing we're currently doing with the APN. All that will still remain free, but we plan to have discussions like this and maybe a whole series on business ownership and really getting into the nuts and bolts of these kind of things, and a whole bunch of other topics that will be available on the membership side of things. Because this stuff does come at a cost for us. You know, it takes a lot of time to put these things together and do it well, not just to have a discussion on a podcast, but to actually think through really a lesson plan and to put these things together and then to edit it and to make it sound professional and do all these things. So we want to provide that as a service that you can count on as something that can be a really valuable resource for you. And like I said, that comes with a cost. Like I mentioned in the beginning, when you hear about some of these people, not just us, doing things that provide value to you, remember that does come at a cost. They also have families and they also have bills to pay, and they want to do the best thing they can. So one last thing from you, Sonia, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I want to know, and we as a group on the CRM Archaeology podcast, we want to know what questions that you, the listeners, have for us regarding business. This is about CRM Archaeology, so we want to hear your questions so that we can address them. Mm-hmm. So send us emails, text us on in the Facebook groups, whatever it takes. I want to hear what your questions are so that I can answer them. And right. I think Chris and Bill and all the other hosts feel the same way.
Indeed.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. Okay,
perfect. Well, with that, we will end this episode. And like Sonia said, comment wherever you see this and let us know what you're thinking. If you can go to arcpodnet.com/CRM Arc Podcast and leave a comment using the thing on the right-hand side. Email Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or find us on social media. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. And like I said, leave those comments. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for the episode. You can also email me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag CRMArcPodcast, or you can tag at ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to the show wherever you saw it. If you share CRM archaeology related items on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else for that matter, be sure to use the hashtag CRMArc so the community can see and comment. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Also, please consider donating to the Archaeology Podcast Network. Your donations help fund our bandwidth and contribute to our editing costs. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in. We'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
I really like that word.
Taco.
It's a great word.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.